I'm so glad you guys are here. I just want to start with the wonderful name TransParents because, I love puns. We'll get there, but it's just such a wonderful, wonderful name, TransParents. Parents, can you start just talking about that name and how that reflects part of what you're going through, what you're experiencing, what you're living?
Patricia's going to take that one because she was actually the one that came up with the name. So I think that she should explain. I think it's fabulous.
It is fabulous.
Actually, you came to me after you thought of it and you said, I have the name for our group.
It's great. Let's hear about it, Patricia.
Well, it probably started because I'm always going to Max with excellent band names for him, and he just won't listen to me. So I had to apply it to my own life, and I had the perfect opportunity. And when we were sort of kicking around names, there's so many wonderful groups out there, but they have a lot of letters and a lot of hard to remember acronyms and so on. And I think I too love puns. And it was just laying there it's just so obvious in hindsight. TransParents, we are open, we're not hiding anything, we are supportive, we are out there in our community, and it just fit. It made perfect sense. So we capitalized the P, added an S, and the rest is history.
It's great. Well, a pat on the back for you.
Thank you.
Patricia, you get that one? Sorry, a pat on the back. Okay, we'll go back to that one later. Yeah, I does this. So it's fantastic. So where do we start on the journey? Who wants to talk about where things began? Finley, we'll start with you.
Absolutely, sure. I think for the group, where things really began is that there weren't a lot of trans people in our area that people knew about. And my mom is like the mayor of everywhere we've ever been. And when I came out, I was about 18 years old. And after a while, people just kind of heard that she had a trans son, and people from our community would reach out. We had 10, 20, maybe 30 people, send her Facebook messages, talk to their friends, ask if they could connect them with us. I got into the practice of taking out younger kind of gender questioning kids for ice cream, and just to have a friendly talk with them, show them, listen to how they were feeling and seeing what they needed. And we realized because of that there was so much need for a place where people could talk to each other without the stress that they were going to be really judged, and also where they could get information. Because when I was going through my kind of early transition process, I felt that I didn't know where to turn. I had very few resources that I could find, and I wasn't sure what my options were. And just being able to bring some of that information together where people can access it felt like it was going to be really life-changing for some people, to dispel the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
And also realizing when we were getting these kind of one-on-one communications, which again, it was amazing, that the amount of outreach that we got, the number of families that had reached out individually. And once you hit a certain point of having these one-on-one interactions, you realize how much richer the conversation can be when you make it a community. And that's when we just decided, a group of us parents decided to put together the support group, just because there were so many people in need who had young people, children that were at very different stages of their transition. And so folks that were further along in the journey, or whose children had transitioned earlier, could provide that type of counsel, just in terms of physicians, therapists, summer camps, name change, how to go about that. And then just having a place where others were holding space for you and would listen, just listening. In a very private environment and confidential environment where they could feel safe.
there's something about still having to have this privacy in order to feel safe that is, for me, still heartbreaking, but we'll get to that part. Max, what about you? How does this all relate to you?
I mean, so I came out as trans at the end of middle school, and I was the first person in my whole grade and in really my whole school that really came out as anything. And sort of slowly after that, a lot of other people started to also come out, but I was really the first in my grade. And so there was a lot of like learning curves sort of between me and in my friend groups and my friends' parents and my friends' friends of trying to figure out how to navigate, like, oh, we're 12 and don't really know what gender is, and you've sort of done this whole new thing. And I know like my mom didn't like really know what was going on, I think. Like you were just kind of like, okay, I'll try my best, you know. And there wasn't a lot of there really wasn't any like support to be like, oh yeah, this is like how you do this. I was really sort of the first in my part of the community to do anything like that. And so like when this group was created and my mom helped co-found it, it was a big thing for like not letting other parents and other families go through the same thing that we did with, like, there was a lot of uncertainty and there were a lot of times where we weren't really sure what to do, and there was a lot of not really knowing where your community was and not having any community at all. And it was trying to sort of fix that problem, and it did a really good job of it.
And how did your families find each other? Patricia, you want to
I
start?
think we had a mutual friend. We had a mutual friend who introduced us, said, you and you guys have to meet. And we did, and that was it. We took off from the second we started.
That's how mainly we've all gotten together up to this point, I'd say, is it's a lot of word of mouth. And you know, we put out information on social media, on our Instagram account, saying, you know, if you are a family that, you know, has a transgender or non-binary child and would like to join our community, we are completely open. And I have to add, we're confidential as much as people would like to be, only because with certain families, their kids aren't out. But then there are other families who, you know, can be much more open about it in terms of talking to other families. They act in more of a mentoring role in terms of reaching out. But I'd say that we get most of the families that come to us are through word of mouth, through friends, such as, you know, with Patricia and I, where we were connected. Sometimes it's through pediatricians, therapists, of course, with the express consent of the families involved. But I also have to put in a big thank you to the Hingham Pride Project, because they were a huge part of this group coming together. They put together a project in 2020 where they had Carrie Rayleigh from Irish Eyes, who's a really brilliant photographer, take pictures of, you know, photos, portraits of LGBTQ plus families in the area. And that was what was posted to social media. And that's kind of where the conversation kind of began on social media, and where people were able to make that connection to the fact that, oh, there are other families out there. And now we have 40 plus families that are part just in this very small geographic area. But it is a lot of, you know, oh, I have a friend, you know, geez, let me put you in touch with, you know, would it be okay if I shared your information? And absolutely, you know, we're open, we're welcoming. We want as many families as would like to join us.
Yeah, I would add, if I can, that you know, while we absolutely welcome our children, some of them are much younger, some of them are young adults, to the group, I'd say the primary focus is for parents and caregivers, because, you know, we as the parents and caregivers on this journey focus so much attention on how to help our children. You know, you end up in that boat where at some point you need to help yourself as well, because it's a journey as much for the families and parents as it is for the the children themselves. And this is when you talk to people who are new to the group and new to the journey, you just immediately remember your first few days and your first few weeks and your first few months, because it's terrifying and scary and overwhelming, and you're trying to just be there for your kid and you don't know how to do that. And I just welcome everybody who can hear this to reach out to us, because there is a place where you can get some support and some help for yourself and your children.
So Patricia, what has been a challenge for parents in this? Do you want to start the conversation about that?
Sure. We I think back to when Max first told us, and you know, our first support was, well, okay, and we love you, but now what do we do? And then once you sit with that for a little while, you start questioning everything. Are you sure? Are you sure? Is this we don't know, you know? And then as we learn more about things, it shifts from an "are you sure" conversation, and that's a very short-lived conversation, but it's a necessary one that everybody has to share and go through to understand it. I think it's not doubting, it's just understanding. And then very quickly you're on to, well, what can we do to support you? And I didn't know. I had no idea. So, you know, I start going to Master Google, and you have to be very careful with that. And there are, I'm happy to say, a number of LGBTQ support groups out there, but this is a very different, very specialized focus. It's sort of a whole nother level that comes with its own unique challenges and ideas that you have to understand. And we were missing that somewhere in our community. So, you know, we've all sort of put it together on our own. We reached out to therapists, we reached out to doctors, we reached out to friends. A lot of us reached out. We are so lucky to be in the greater Boston area because we have some amazing, amazing support groups who you can count on to know what they're doing. Boston Children's Hospital, Mass General, Boston Medical Center, the Finley Health Center. Those are amazing resources and a great place to get started. But when you bring it back to the more personal level, this kind of parental support group is also sorely needed. And we help each other find the ways, you know, who's looking for, you know, voice transitions, who's looking for, you know, maybe surgeries, who's simply looking for, what are some name change, how to do a name change, testosterone, the whole slew. And those are unique challenges to this particular group.
And Finley, for you, how did you tell your family? Was that difficult? Max, I'm going to come back and ask you the same question. Was it difficult?
That's, you know, I think that's a funny question for me, because before I had come out to my mother as trans, I had about 2.5, 3 years before I had come out as a lesbian, and I've been living as a lesbian. And I thought that I had been told as a kid, I was like, that everything that I felt, that made me a tomboy. And I was like, okay, I guess that's what this is. And I was very proud to be a part of the LGBTQ plus community. I was very happy to have found community in that way. But after a while, I realized that really wasn't, it wasn't the answer to the problems that I was having. And I was struggling a lot emotionally during that time in school. I had a lot of mental health problems that I had to deal with because of everything that I was going through. And when I came to the conclusion that I was trans, I realized that I didn't want to do that experience with my parents the same way that I had when I had come out as gay, because I had known for a very long time at that point, and I had agonized over it and held so much fear. I put it off for years and years, and I didn't want to make them a part of that, because even though they're incredibly supportive people, you always feel that there's that small chance that that maybe they'll reject you and you can't. And that just is more than a lot of people are willing to risk for good reason. And for me, when I came to the conclusion that I was trans, I was like, okay, I am going to tell them now. I'm going to tell them immediately because I don't want to build it up over all this time for myself. Like I did the first time. I want them to be a part of this with me. I'm sure my mom always remembers that day. I had her pick me up from school and I told her in a Starbucks parking lot in the car, which is burned into my brain. And I told her that I had picked out a name and that's what I wanted to be called. And I had tested it out with my friends to make sure it was the perfect name for me. And she was like, okay, that's great. I love that name. So in many ways, coming out as trans was a lot less difficult for me than some of the kind of emotional conversations we had had running up to that, because at this point, I had a very certain idea of the wrong way to go about that for me personally. And I wanted to do it differently. I wanted them in on the ground floor to help me figure out what my new life was going to be like.
It's a powerful story. Moira, what was that like for you in the parking lot of Starbucks?
I have to say it was actually a bit of a relief. When Finley came out to me as being a lesbian, it was, no big deal. Many of my friends are lesbians, as he knows, and good friends of him as well. So not shocking, not surprised at all. But after he had come out as lesbian, he did go through a really, really difficult time, as he was just saying, just a lot of depression and anxiety, just had to take medical leave from school. And it was so difficult as a parent during that time, because I was very fearful for his well-being. And to an extent, as a parent, you have some control over these things. I felt very, very out of control in terms of being able to help him. We tried everything that we, had at our disposal in terms of mental health care, trying to find doctors, that could help him from a psychiatrist's perspective, everything else. And so to be quite honest, when he came out as transgender to me in that Starbucks parking lot, I was a little bit like, hallelujah, because I knew that he had a very, very good connection with an incredibly, incredibly life-saving counselor at school. He went to Milton Academy. And I would say that she was truly a lifesaver in that case. She was able to talk to him very, from a very well-informed perspective, but also from a very compassionate perspective about the differences between being gay and being transgender.
She was very compassionate, because at the time when I told her, I said she was a married lesbian woman. And I said, I kind of thought that other lesbians feel like this. And she was like, no, no. That's not how lesbians feel. I was like, well, thank you for clearing that up. So
he was very lucky. We were lucky as a family that we had that person to really, and she also was very helpful in talking with Finn about having that discussion with his family. So it was relief. It was honestly relief. I said to myself, thank God. It wasn't surprising to us. Maybe it was easier for our family because it wasn't shocking.
And was the depression, the anxiety related to not feeling right as a lesbian? And
I think I was trying to figure out for a while why I didn't feel right. And when we look back, we always joke about how obvious it was to us when I was in 4th grade telling her that I wanted a curly mustache and ice tips like the guys in NoFX. There's so many things we can point back to be like, this was very clear at the time. But because there weren't a lot of transgender people in the media, there weren't transgender people in my daily life, until I really met a transgender person, a transgender man at the end of high school, I had no conception that that was something that existed. I didn't know that that was someone you could be. And I just thought I was a very sad, very masculine woman. And that was the best that I could kind of hope for. And I was trying to work within those parameters. And no matter what I did, it wasn't making me happy. I was really struggling just to try and play that role on a basic level at any point in my life. I have a panic attack when you put me in a dress. I really couldn't handle it. I wasn't sure why.
Yeah, I can't help myself, but having it, the reveal in Starbucks, you know, better latte than never. Sorry. I couldn't resist.
Solid
Max,
7.
Thank you. Max, how about you? What was this like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel I should preface this with I am also autistic, and those two things, me being transgender and me being autistic, are very interconnected in my personal experience, and they have a lot to do with one another. And so I just feel the need to mention that right off the bat, because anything I say that has to do with my personal experience is very connected to the fact that I am autistic, and that had a lot of influence on how I dealt with and lived my life through these times. But honestly, like because of that, I always felt like I almost sort of like always lived in my head when I was a kid. Like I never felt connected to the world around me. I didn't feel connected to my body. I was always very closed off, and I didn't have like too many friends. I mostly stayed to myself. And as I started getting older, and that started getting like a little more weird when you get into like middle school and out of like elementary school and stuff, and you're sort of like, oh wait, this like actually isn't normal. And I started thinking a little bit more about myself. Like it just honestly, it always made sense to me, because I grew up knowing what gay people were, what trans people were, and what that meant, but I never applied it to myself. I was just like, yeah, that's cool. I watched an episode of Glee when I was like 4 years old, saw boys kissing for the first time, and was like, that's so cool. I want to do that when I grow up. It was never a surprise to my family. But I remember I finally realized and sort of like fully accepted that I was trans probably in 8th grade. And I lived that whole school year. I didn't come out to my parents until the end of the year, but I lived that whole year out as my new trans self at school. And I told all my friends, and I told like some of my teachers, and we all sort of tried to make that work for me being out, kind of like half out to some people and not to others. And it like half worked. All of my friends told their parents and did not tell me that they told their parents. And I was terrified. I was like, oh God. But then I finally, the reason I didn't come out to my parents for so long wasn't even so much because I was so worried, because I grew up with you guys always just preaching about kindness and being kind to everyone. And so I knew they would accept me, but I was just always so closed off and kept to myself as a kid that I was like, I don't want to talk to my parents about this. That means I'm going to have to be open. That means I'm going to have to be emotional. I don't want to do that. And so I just kept it to myself for so long. And finally, the thing that finally made me want to do it and finally be like, I can't do this anymore, I have to tell everyone, was on the last day of school, 8th grade. It was my last day of middle school. We were going out that night with some extended family in Boston for dinner. And I thought to myself, I was just like, I cannot introduce myself to these people as someone who I am not anymore. So, but to do that, that means I have to tell you guys. And so I came home from school that day, and I went up to my room and I called my at the time girlfriend, and I said, I'm gonna do it. And then I went downstairs and I interrupted a very important conversation with you and Jack.
We were sitting right here. I'm sitting right in this spot.
And I said, Mom, Jack is my brother. I said, Mom, Jack, I'm a guy. And you said, I said, I'm not who you think I am, was my exact words. And you said, okay. so what now? And I said, okay, well, I'm a guy. And he said, okay, do you want us to call you anything? And I was like, shit, yeah, Max. And then I went back upstairs and that was that. And we went to dinner that night.
And so I turned to my son, who's 4 years older, and I said, well, what do we do now? And he says, without missing a beat, call him Max. And it was just as simple as that. It really was. And things started to work better at that point. Don't you think? From that point on, things just got a lot easier. Similar maybe to Moira and Finley. It was almost, I didn't realize what he was going through his whole 8th grade year, but I relate to Moira and Finley's story because it just, instead of being scary, I mean, it had its own scary moments, but it was just like, oh, I get it. Okay, now that we know what we're dealing with, now we can work on this. Now we've got a direction to move in. Now we're free to move forward.
Yeah. So you really, I hate to say, sort of maxed out on that. Okay. I'm going to be even worse now. We have to take a transition to our commercial break. So we will do that. Larry, we're transitioning over to you. We'll take a commercial break. We'll be right back with the Dr. Joe Show.
You're listening to the Dr. Joe Show, here with Moira and Finley Congdon and Patricia and Max Wanty.
So what do you think of this conversation, Tom?
I mean, I'm an insufferably big picture thinker. So past guests to talk about trans rights were, big figures. Erin Reed, Alana McLaughlin, and I just keep in my head all the ugliness going on. And it's refreshing to have happy families to talk about their experience, their positive experiences and their happy interactions, just to help me remember it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah. I mean, because there's so much going on in the country about this as well. And not all of it is very nice.
And I gotta say, I've tried to get past guests, Erin Reed, Alana McLaughlin, other guests include the streamer Keffels. I've tried to get Alejandro Caballero, prominent trans figures. They are exhausted. They've been having to drive state to state, fighting for their right to exist in state houses, not getting a second's sleep.
So that's part of why we're here tonight. So I think, we were talking offline that Moira was talking about the good things, but also some of the other things that accomplish and accompany this. Let's talk about the good things first, and then we'll dive into some of the more difficult parts. Tell me about the good things. There are supports for people.
There are supports for people. And again, the support in Massachusetts is exceptional. There's an organization called the Mass Trans Political Coalition. They're the one that we're doing the fundraising drag bingo for on the 31st. And they, oh my goodness, they support the entire transgender community through, everything from, they've employed Ropes and Gray to help with the name change process pro bono for families, which can be a really daunting process. They have educational areas that come out and will come to your organizations and educate on transgender inclusion. They're actually right now launching a pilot program called the Trans Leadership Academy that helps transgender people, especially BIPOC transgender individuals, with job training. They get them a TPAS, they get them a laptop, they do mentorship, job training, help them find jobs, help reduce homelessness, recidivism. They do an incredible job of that support. So they're a really bright light, and they're I think the only like state-run organization that's really on a national level as big and as prominent as they are, and it's for good reason. They really get the job done, work very, very hard. You know, and then there's smaller support groups like ours, but then you also have PFLAG. I know the Duxbury PFLAG has a group for transgender folks as well. You know, Hingham Pride Project. So there are a lot of groups out there to support, but I do have to say right now, it's overwhelming what's going on in the United States in terms of some really dangerous and frightening legislation that is going on. And as you mentioned, you know, these bright lights in the non-binary community, these transgender leaders are absolutely exhausted. And, you know, one of the reasons that we were really motivated to come on the show and talk to you, and again, we so appreciate that opportunity, is because transgender leaders are asking for allies to step up. And they make a very good point that being an ally and doing nothing means nothing. That you need to be informed, you need to step up, and you need to be an active advocate. And part of that is understanding what is going on in the United States right now, which I think, you know, I'd love to have, you know, Finn and Max to talk about it, in particular from their standpoint. You know, we can support as much as we can try to support, but at the end of the day, we need a wider base of support to address, you know, the hate mongering and again, the very, very dangerous language and legislation that's being proposed right now. So I didn't know if you wanted to maybe touch base on a few of those things that are going on right now that are particularly egregious, just to make people aware of it. They may not be.
Yeah, I mean, in general terms that we were speaking about, I mean, 7 states have already fully banned gender affirming care for people under the age of 18. 21 states have introduced some sort of legislation to do that. And I know a lot of people, I've heard interviews, a lot of people have questions. They ask, why can't you wait? And I think that people need to know that there are a lot of young people that just won't be able to make it that long. It's easy to say, why can't you wait? But even before I got to the age of 18, which was when I really came to understand why I was going through what I was going through, I don't know that I would have been able to make it that long myself without the support that I had from family and from some really fantastic providers, because it can be unbelievably painful and confusing to see yourself in a body that you can't imagine going into adulthood with. So as much as it's great to talk about protecting children and keeping people safe and doing all these things with a lot of information, which I would say from my experience and from the experience of a lot of the young people we work with in the support group, that their doctors are incredibly well informed. Their providers are incredibly well informed. They aren't doing this overnight. There are long periods of discussion. There are long periods of learning. There are other sorts of bills that have been passed. 18 states have banned transgender students from participating on school sports teams. And I think for myself, I played high school hockey, middle school hockey. Hockey was my whole life growing up. And that was the one thing for me that made me happy to be in my body. It was the one thing that really made the experience of struggling to exist within my body, that I felt that it was doing something positive for me, that I could feel strong, I could be happy with what my physical capabilities were. So I think that excluding young trans people from sports does a lot more harm than even people might understand. That I think for a lot of people can be one way that they can connect with their bodies in a positive way, which can be really few and far between for people.
And it's the entry point that opens up the whole, it's such a bad faith wedge to try to get people to doubt the validity of trans people in general, because, well, it's an unfair all of sports, Hassan Piker put this perfectly. All of sports is based on unfair physical advantages. Have you seen Michael Phelps? The man's half fish. Think of how many people who are over 7 feet. Like, what's the statistics? Like 90% of them are in the NBA? Give me a break.
Yeah, I mean, hormones change your body. Any advantage that you have when you start taking hormones, you're probably gonna lose most of it. And the other thing that I've been thinking about with banning trans people from sports is I feel I've seen a lot of takes from TERFs and radical feminists being like, oh, well, these men are trying to hurt our girls, and that's a take that I see a lot that is incredibly transphobic and incorrect. But the thing that it leaves out that completely negates that take is that trans men are getting banned from sports too. So if your whole idea is, oh, well, these assigned male at birth people have an advantage over assigned female at birth people, what about the assigned female at birth people who are men? Who are playing in male sports? Are you
Isn't
saying
that hard mode?
It completely like negates their take.
That's legendary. All skulls on.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing we wanted to mention, and I think is really important in this conversation, because as you said, a lot of people have these little wedge issues that open the discussion for them, and a lot of time it's about children. It's about protecting children. And recently we've seen a few bills, they've been introduced in Oklahoma and Texas, that would basically make gender affirming care inaccessible to people of all ages. Adults, minors, everybody. And I think it's really important to raise awareness about things like that. But one of them's already passed through the state house, been voted on, passed through the house, because it's not about children. It's not about children. It's never been about children. It's an easy way for people to disguise the issue, but genuinely, once you've moved through children, they're attacking adults. They're attacking trans people's ability to exist in any space, of any age, at any point.
I don't want my child bride exposed to this.
Right, but just using the word protecting implies that there's a danger. Words are so powerful. We have to protect our children from what? From people affirming their identity, from people saying, this is who I am, without that judgment. There's, words are very powerful in that way. Patricia, your, TransParents brilliance, what do you think the danger is right now? Why are we so divided about this particular topic?
Well, I ask myself that every day. Where does this hate come from? When I'm reading the paper and I'm watching the news and I'm listening to interviews, I just can't for the life of me understand where this hate comes from. But I think something Finn touched on is that it's just it's just an excuse for a larger issue, and it's not just transgender people who are under attack. It's all our vulnerable communities right now are under attack. And I think it's an attempt to distract from what the real and what the important issues are. Where is our country going? Where's our world going in terms of climate change? Where are we going in terms of our democracy? Where are we going in terms of gun violence? And then if you break it down to an even just more in your house level, in states like Texas, if you can distract, and I'm from Texas, born, raised, and college educated, so and plenty of family still there, so I feel I can speak to this. If you distract with the hate, then they're not so focused on the fact that why isn't our grid working and we don't have heat this winter, or why isn't our grid working and we don't have air conditioning this summer? How come our poverty rates are going up? How come we can't get health care for everybody? So instead of tackling those big issues, it's much easier to stir the pot with hate for all of these vulnerable groups. So our BIPOC communities, women women in this country. I mean, it's the same thing, you know, they're just being, all our rights are being taken away little bit by little bit. Like Finn said, you know, you start with something small and then it's the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It's not going to end. And I just can't understand where the cruelty comes from, because that is what it is. And I don't know if you're familiar with Heather Cox Richardson. She's a historian, a great renown, and she wrote an article recently about the Conservative Political Action Committee meeting that they just had, I guess, last week, where their host said,
Michael Knowles.
Yes.
Transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. The whole preposterous ideology at every level.
For the good of society, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. What is that? What is that?
Right.
It's the
Well,
sort
let's
of
debate this. Let's have a debate.
It's
Let's have a
genocide.
debate. Let's debate this in good faith.
Yeah, no, never going to happen. They won't. And you know, it's when you start to make people unequals, because in our country, we're all built, our founding principles are equality. When you start to take that away and some people aren't equal to others, then you lose everything. You know, you just are hoping you're not the next one who's not in the unequal block, because when they're done with us, they're coming for whoever's next. I guarantee you, it doesn't ever end.
What's the poem? First they came for the people that I don't like, and then
Exactly.
everything was fine.
Absolutely. Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Can I add one
Well-
thing that's really particularly frightening? Is
Sure,
that
please.
Sorry. I just want to make sure that we get this one in, because this one to me is honestly, I think one of the most egregious. Again, the you know, banning access to healthcare, you know, transgender, you know, gender affirming healthcare saves lives, right? Talking about protecting people from having their lives saved. It completely makes no sense. I think probably one of the most frightening ones, though, is in Florida right now, where, you know, they have a bill proposed that would not only make it illegal in affirming trans children in a family as child abuse, and giving the grounds as a child abuser, as a parent, if you support your child in that journey, to take the child out of your care and put them in the custody of the state. So here you are, first of all, you know, you have lawmakers or these legislators who don't understand what transgenderism is all about. And, you know, they're completely going against the physicians, therapists, you know, everyone that's out there. And this is not only limited to, you know, families that have a trans child. The bill actually also applies to any child that is considered at risk of transitioning. And so the law claims that just even having another trans child, a sibling or a parent in the house that's trans, would put that child at risk, and they could be taken away. So here you are doing, you know, they're saying they're protecting these children, is taking a child out of a supportive environment that is giving them, you know, the healthcare that they need, the love that they need, the support, the home,
The mental care that they need, the emotional care.
and putting them in the custody of the state, even if they're not transgender, even if they're at this risk of being transgender, because God knows that transgenderism, wow, they're acting like that it's contagious or something. It's crazy. That's frightening to me. And just the idea that there could be that intervention to take your child away from the very, very place.
I mean,
that
just to bring that back home, Moira, if you know, Thomas, you were talking about our happy families. Our children transitioned before they were 18 or thereabouts. If we were in these states, they not only would they be attempting to take our children from us, from us. We could be facing jail time. Our children, I can't even begin to imagine the horrors our children would face. And we're just so lucky to be in Massachusetts. But I find that being here comes with a responsibility. We can't just sit back and say, well, thank God we're not there.
Right.
We have to do our part.
And we will, and that's part of why we're talking here tonight. And I'm fortunate that our sponsors also do their parts. And so with that in mind, we are going to take a commercial break so our sponsors can tell us how they are going to help. All right, we'll be right back with the Dr. Joe Show.
Welcome back to the Dr. Joe Show, here with Moira and Finley Congdon and Patricia and Max Wanty.
Yeah, and we're having an incredible discussion. But for our listeners, there's so much that we could do here. But from the I am approach, because the 4 domains interact, the home domain, the social domain, the biological, and the I see, how I see myself, how I think other people see me, which is a major part of what we're talking about tonight. Small changes can have big effects. We don't need to change everything. So I'm going to ask Moira and Finley first, what small change can you recommend to our listeners, given what we're talking about tonight? Moira, you take it away.
Sure. I would highly recommend that they educate themselves on these issues. I think it is easy when you or convenient when you don't have a person within your family that is transgender to not be an ally or an advocate. There are only so many hours in the day, and I understand that. But I think that there is so much going on in this country right now that we all need to be aware of. Because yes, in Massachusetts, I think Massachusetts is in a much better place than other states. However, it's right in our backyard. And I think that there are still groups within Massachusetts that are, promoting anti-trans rhetoric and legislation. There are wonderful resources out there. As I mentioned, there's the Mass Trans Political Coalition. There is also on Instagram, just following certain folks that are in the transgender community that are so well informed. There's Chase Strangio, and we can list these if people are interested. They can certainly reach out.
A lot of small changes, so people can go to these places.
Yes,
and they can make that education. Finn, what about you? What small change would you recommend to our listeners?
In their homes, in their lives, simply, I would say that it isn't just trans people who can take gender, who can explore gender and not live it as this incredibly stigmatized binary. If you show other people in your life that you don't take it as a life or death situation, the binary of gender that you have been assigned, I think that shows people around you that they can be safe talking to you about those issues. And also call lawmakers, call all your lawmakers, call all your lawmakers, call everybody's lawmakers. It can't hurt. There are people like Chase Strangio, list all those numbers.
Yeah, that's great. Big, small change. Patricia, small change is going to have big effects. What small change do you recommend to our listeners?
Compassion. Just have compassion for the people around you and what they might be going through. It's not about you. It's about them. Just take 3 seconds to just breathe, think about it for a minute, and have compassion.
Max, small changes.
I would say, like you mentioned earlier, that language is an incredibly powerful thing. Like when people refer to me by my preferred name and pronouns, I get a little giddy happy feeling every time. And so I would say, think about what gendered language you're using in your everyday life. Like if you're like at school or like at work, a lot of times you'll see like he/she. Just say they. It can be a lot easier. And removing gendered language from your everyday life, just little things like that, sir, ma'am, miss. Mr., just removing things like that. If you don't know how a certain person wants to be referred to, taking away that gendered language can show people, even if it doesn't look like they need it, they might. It can make so many people feel so much safer.
Mhm.
And we've got about 30 seconds for each of you. Thank you, Max. You control no one, you influence everyone. Everyone is interested in what you think or feel about them, and we all want the same thing, which is just to feel valued. Patricia, we'll start with you, then go to Max. You control no one, you influence everyone. Patricia, Wanty, what kind of influence do you want to be?
I try to lead by example. I try to have my actions be reflective of my thoughts, feelings, my beliefs, and I try to put that out there as much as I can.
I'm going to actually skip around. I'm going to go to Moira first. Small changes. You control no one, you influence everyone. 30 seconds. What kind of influence do you want to be?
Viewing others as humans, not in a gendered way. I think the influence is, as Patricia said, agreed, lead by example and lead with humanity. Lead with humanity, view others as human beings, and everyone is on a journey to find their authentic self. This is no different.
Finn?
The influence I want to be, I want to show young people that trans lives are happy lives, they're fulfilling lives, they are surrounded by love, and that no one can stop you from being yourself, and that if you feel like you won't be happy that way, you should try.
Mm-hmm. Max, we're going to end it with you. You control no one, you influence everyone. Max, what kind of influence do you want to be?
So I teach a lot of young kids, and I spend a lot of time around very young influential people, and I always say and think that I want to show them that it's okay to be weird, that I can dye my hair and I can wear spikes on my clothing and I can listen to weird music that not everyone listens to, and that's okay, and that I'm happy and that I'm not embarrassed, and that it's okay if they want to be weird. Even if they've never seen someone like me, they're not alone, and it's okay.
Folks, thank you so much for this very important conversation. Tom, I'll be seeing you next week. Thanks, Larry. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week on the Dr. Joe Show.
WATD FM Marshfield.
So we are off air, but we're still live on Facebook. There's so much more to talk about.
Yes. And like, for example, we never talked, I guess it has to be another show of its own, but like drag is so misunderstood.
Yes, yes.
Well,
Like,
baby.
It's theater. It's
It's
simple
art.
as that. It's performance. And it's like, well, can it be sexual? And it's like, okay, everything you see on the screen right now turns someone on. That's how human beings work.
It's terrifying, Tom. Terrifying.
Welcome to the club. I didn't know that. Catch up, maybe.
Yeah, just don't stand up, Tom. Stay right where you are. Okay.
You're killing me with that blind behind you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would love to have you guys come back and talk about that particular topic if we wanted to, but what else? I'm concerned about the dark side that you guys face on a daily basis. And how do you manage that? How do you retain your resilience, knowing that you're valuable? How do you do that? Finn?
I think that is something that people kind of ignore in this, is that even you don't have to be a trans activist, just being a trans person going through your daily life, seeing all this happening, it takes so much energy, it takes so much out of you just to know that that's happening around you, and to have that level of fear that other people just don't need to have. I think for me, in some ways, when I came out, I found it very freeing, because I knew there was a whole section of people who just would never like me. No matter what I did, they would never like me again, because I was pursuing the person I wanted to be. And there wasn't anything I could do about that. And that, I felt like that was a big weight off my shoulders. But I think that what helps me so much now is like my queer community, and of course my like wonderful allies too. But with all of these people coming out of the woodwork to say awful things about people like me, it also brings a lot of people out who you might never have spoken to, who just want to show you how much they care about you because they know how hard this can be to hear all these fear-mongering things about yourself when we're all individuals. We're just trying to live our lives. We're just trying to be happy. This has nothing to do with anybody else. But it has brought out a lot of people who I would never have connected with otherwise, and given me a way to really like find a loving community that knows how important it is to show that love and to show that support all the time, because we're experiencing the exact opposite the rest of the day. So people are very outward with their support when they have it.
Max, is that your experience as well? That there's so much anger and hate towards you?
Yeah, I in my personal experience, I've been very lucky that I've had a very supportive environment and that I've had very supportive friends and my family's been very supportive. But I have had a lot of people in my life, not even necessarily who are hateful, but just don't care. And that can have a huge negative impact, because even just not caring, not taking the time to just say, okay, well, sure, I'll call you by this name, can have such a negative impact on people. And I've sort of learned how to sort of get past it when I can. You influence who you can influence and you ignore who you can't. But like that can be like heartbreaking to some people. There are people who take their lives because of things like that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's,
Yeah.
I think the fear mongering has overplayed its hand. I think it has made a grave mistake in being as vehement as it is. Because there are people who would consider themselves more socially conservative, who would think, yeah, trans, it's weird, I guess, but like, they're not hurting. Then they see a swarm of Oath Keepers and NSC and Proud Boys bringing rifles to drag shows.
At libraries.
At libraries. You lost them.
Yeah. I hope you're right, but I fear you're not right enough.
Oh, I know how, like, I know all too well, because the indifference is the biggest danger.
Mhm.
Like, back to Nazi Germany. It was
Right.
less than a third of the active members of the Nazi Party were vehemently anti-Semitic.
Mhm.
It was the material. Look, to quote a certain philosopher, we live in a material world. I'm a material girl. When you're wondering how you put food on the table, when you're wondering like, hey, why can't I have a house? Why can't? How do you explain it? Do you say that you're in power? Do you say I screwed up? I'm not going to do anything, or do you say it's those guys?
Mhm.
Which one's easier?
Mhm.
Mm.
And I pointed and my eyes went wide when I heard Finley, when you talk about I can't wait till I'm 18, because that's such a it's such a cowardly way of talking about it. So I have a past in the right-wing online sphere, and Nick Rekieta, Nick, how you doing, buddy? He went on a rant about the streamer Keffels, who is a trans woman and has a Discord server where, she gives advice to other trans kids. And he says,
get the fucking chainsaws ready. And we help them by directing them to informed consent clinics where they can start taking hormones and show them how to use medical system to get it covered by government health insurance if they needed. Fuck you. Gross. Get fucking out of every single person. That's Keffels' words. You transgender my children and I'll trans life you. Guaranteed. Fuck you. These people are gross. These people are disgusting. Stay away from kids. You go on the fucking wall right next to every other groomer, every other child molester, and every other fucking pedophile on the planet. You are disgusting. Let them turn 18 and make their decisions when they're legally capable. And if you can't do that, you should consider finding a steamroller to let run over you. You fucking disgusting pile of shit.
You go on the fucking wall. And I knew then and there I made the right choice walking away from those people years ago. Because Nick,
But Tom, it's really important to not mimic their anger.
Yeah.
This is
I can't.
critical.
No,
But you have to, because this is where mirror neurons come in. It is the anger of others that we need to show respect for. You know that. When is the last time you got angry at someone treating you with respect? No, that's the power of respect. And it is so easy for our mirror neurons. So mirror neurons are part of our brain that mirror what other people think or feel. So you go to a movie and someone's sad and you feel sad. Somebody's happy, you feel happy. It's the same here. If we are reflective instead of reflexive, we can then activate their mirror neurons and say, wait a second, what are you so angry about? You want to feel valuable? We want to feel valuable. It's actually not a you and a we, it's us. We all want the same thing. How do we work together so that it's not about being different? We're one group. It's called humanity. Tom's heard me say this before.
but
That's the challenge. That's the challenge, because we could just as easily turn our backs on all those people who turn their backs on you.
But these are true
Not
believers.
easy.
These are true believers.
I know.
They
You're never
enjoy
going
the
to change
cruelty.
their minds. You're never going to change their minds.
Think of the
You have
energy.
to work on the ones that you can change.
Exactly.
Yes, I agree with that. And I'm not saying that we set ourselves up for some absolutely ridiculous,
but for
optimistic thing that Joe
just to-
Schran does, but
I gotta say,
I believe.
So example with Nick Rekieta is, so he obviously said that about Keffels years ago when I exposed a pedophile in the fan base of a rival podcaster, heinous child porn trading, and he invited him on to stream. Couldn't have been more polite to him.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. It's almost like it's not about the kids.
No, but it's who we are. And that's why, the way we respond to these haters is, I hope not to hate. But that's just me. What do I know?
We had talked about.
Wait, I saw Moira's eyes. Moira's eyes just like do that. And I could see that. Go ahead, Moira.
Oh, no, I was just thinking with, the ban on the drag queens and trying to take away that art form. And, I know for you, Finley, that, Finn is a huge fan of drag shows. And, you've said that it was really something that helped you through kind of its darkest times, watching RuPaul's drag show, right? Because that actually was something that was kind of joyous in terms of
Great show. Love it. Totally love it.
And going to drag shows in Boston and gaining queer community there. It's a way to look at some of the hard part. All the trans people aren't the only people in the queer community who are confronted with challenges around gender. And being able to look at that and laugh and to enjoy it and take the thing that is supposed to scare you the most and gain joy out of it, I think is really beautiful. And I can see why people who disagree would attack it, because it is so powerful, that joy. And that's why I think a lot of trans people now and trans activists have been talking a lot more about trans joy, because we spend so much time talking about dysphoria and legal attacks and the challenges of being a young trans person, an older trans person. But something that we really leave out of that is how beautiful our life experiences are. Like it's hard to be in a body that doesn't feel right, but when your body and your presentation become something that you can be happy with, that is an unrivaled feeling. That really, it's not the euphoria side of dysphoria.
Yeah.
So talking about trans joy is something I'm really passionate about, because I want to make sure that other people get to see us that way, get to see our community as these vibrant people who are willing to do so much to just be ourselves and be happy. And I think that that's really inspiring to other people, because you don't have to be trans to be like, I don't like to wear bright shirts because I don't want people to look at me, but I love those shirts. We show people that you don't lose everything if you give up whatever you need to give up to be a happy, fulfilled person who follows your bliss, who follows who you really want to be seen as.
Adding on to that, Finn, I just want to say, because like when there is so much hate in the world right now, and there's all these lawmakers and constantly trying to pass new bills with all these anti-trans, getting rid of our rights. One of the best things that we can do as a community to fight back against that on an extremely personal level is they want to get rid of us. They want us to die. They want us gone. They want us miserable. One of the best things that we can do to fight that is just to be happy in the face of them trying to get rid of us. If we can just enjoy our lives and experience happiness when that is the last thing they want us to experience, that is a win.
Absolutely.
It's radical, yeah, resistance.
Adding on to that, you remind me of an article in the Globe I read a few months back, maybe, in I think by Christopher Muther, the travel writer, and he did a deep dive on Florida, especially the LGBTQ community in Florida, facing all of these issues, and saying, how are you still there? How can you live there? How come you haven't left? And their response is, because then they win. And why do they get to have all the beaches? Why? So, why should we leave? That's just giving them what they want. And the advice was, research before you go there, support local LGBTQ communities, stores, restaurants, tour guides, really go en masse, go to Florida, go to these places and live and be happy. I mean, you don't have to live there, let's just visit, but
It's gonna be our next wave of freedom riders.
Right, exactly. Just if we leave, they win.
Yeah.
And they can't stand the happiness, is like,
No, you're right.
when you're so let me be mad is my advice.
Tom, you can hold that.
That's
fine,
my
man.
lot in life. I am a rage.
That's why you're here, Tom.
As I said earlier, not here, but you can take the autist out of the blood sports. You can't take the blood sports out of the autist. So Max, I too was on the spectrum. And so also with the under 18 thing is I thinking like, what if we did nothing about my diagnosis until I turned 18? What if we treated it like a vice, like smoking? Like, what if you treated depression and anxiety? It's like, oh, let's wait until you're 18.
Just to make sure you're really sure you're suicidal, because it might just be a phase and you'll outgrow it. And in fact, we did live that way. We lived that way, until maybe
you guys didn't get me diagnosed until like the 5th grade, and you had to like fight tooth and nail with the school, didn't you?
Well, A little bit, yeah, but they came around. But I mean, the point is, it's only been in the last maybe 30, 40 years that we finally acknowledged, mental health issues, emotional health issues, and we don't just send people to an institution and forget they ever existed, and that's very much what it feels like half the country is trying to get back to. And I just don't get it. I don't get it.
Well,
Dehumanizing.
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just saying, yes, I was agreeing. I said, it is dehumanizing in terms of the treatment. Yeah.
Right. But you see, for me, that is actually a glimmer of hope. The only way we can really hurt each other is to dehumanize.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? That means that human beings want to protect each other. And the only way we can hurt each other is to say, you're not human. You're not in my group. This is unfortunately what we've done for millennia. We have a brain that is still very primitive and looks at one group as the in group and another as the out group. And the out group poses a threat to all the resources that the in group wants. That's a limbic. That's an ancient, emotional, irrational part of the brain. But we have developed and evolved a prefrontal cortex, part of the brain right behind your forehead. This is the thinking part of the brain that can anticipate the future, solve problems, anticipate what will happen next. And what I'm really hoping is that enough people will begin to anticipate what will happen next if we keep doing what we're doing now. We'll destroy ourselves. That's not what anybody really wants. I'm serious when I say we all want the same thing, which is just to feel valued by someone. And if we can help each other recognize that I can disagree with you, doesn't mean I don't value you. Those are two different things. It's all about respect. That's what the I am approach is all about. Who are you? Why do you do what you do? What's the influence of the domains? It's not about judging. Think about the words, to look again at someone. Look again, look. Again, to repeat something, look like a spectator. That's respect why people do what they do without judging them. That's really where I hope we can be. And I have faith. I really do. And part of it is because of people like you who are willing to come and share your stories. And for all the guests that we've had on the Dr. Joe show, I mean, remarkable people. And I'm, incredibly honored to have people here so we can learn from each other. Who are you and why do you do what you do? Without that judgment. It's really what it's about. Respect leads to value, and value leads to trust. And with that trust, you can be who you are without worrying that when you share your secret, you will be judged as less than. That's not what trust is about. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you guys exemplify, Max and Finn, when you told your parents what was going on, couldn't do that without trust. That's who we are as humans. This is one of the problems with when you let a psychiatrist talk.
That's good. I agree.
I took some notes.
Yeah. So it's great. I hope you guys have had fun. This will be a podcast Tom will put together for podcast next week, and then some isolated clips as well. You're welcome to come back anytime. Really, really enjoy that and to hear about where we can go.
Thank you.
We are thankful and grateful to you both for allowing us to come on and have this conversation. Yeah, that's soul work. It really is.
I just want to change the one word allow. We're not gatekeepers that way. We are honored that people are willing to come on. It's like, you really want to come on our show? How cool is that?
No, that was
Well,
great.
Thank you.
that's so funny because that's how we feel. Really? You really want us on your show? Really?
That's great.
Speak for yourself. I was like,
Thanks,
oh yeah.
thanks. There you go, Max. I don't know.
Be there.
And the only one word that I would ask you all to consider changing is you're not talking to people, with people.
Mhm.
You really are. There's a difference. Talking to someone is almost unidirectional, talking at them. That's not what you guys are doing. You're talking with people. It's a really, really important. These small words can have these big effects. You know. Thanks so much for coming on, folks.
Thank you.
Gratitude.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank
Have this
you.
Thanks, Tom.
Stretch the kindness, brush with madness. Is it sadness or just a show that